Sean Diddy Combs convicted on federal charges. Possible Trump pardon reported. Sean Diddy Combs has been convicted on 2 federal charges, each carrying a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison. In a surprising development, reports indicate that former President Donald Trump's team has been in talks with Combs' attorneys regarding a potential presidential pardon. The development raises questions over whether such a move would be viewed as justice, politics, or even payback. At the same time, Combs' legal team has filed papers seeking to have his conviction thrown out and to secure a new trial, arguing that his actions are protected under the First Amendment. The case follows a 7-week criminal trial that ended with guilty verdicts on 2 federal sex crime-related charges. Despite the conviction, reports suggest Trump may consider granting Combs a pardon. According to TMZ, discussions between Trump's circle and Combs' attorneys are underway, and the decision may hinge on whether Judge Arun Subramanian grants Combs bail, as well as the final sentencing outcome scheduled for October 3rd. Combs was acquitted on charges of racketeering and sex trafficking, but convicted on 2 counts under the Mann Act, involving the transportation of women across state lines for the purpose of sex work. Each charge carries up to a decade in prison, though prosecutors previously indicated they may seek a sentence of 4 to 5 years. With no mandatory minimum attached, sentencing remains at the discretion of the judge. Defense attorneys are seeking time served or a reduced sentence of 21 to 27 months. Combs has already spent nearly a year in custody, which will count toward any final sentence. Meanwhile, public reaction has been divided. Conservative commentator Megyn Kelly posted on social media, "Trump should not pardon Diddy. He doesn't deserve it. He's a Trump hater. He's a woman abuser." Rapper 50 Cent also weighed in, suggesting that Combs' past critical remarks about Trump may influence the former president's decision. Notably, Trump previously described Combs as a good friend during a 2012 episode of The Apprentice. However, relations appeared to sour in later years as Combs made sharp political statements about Trump, including predictions of racial conflict if Trump were re-elected. The legal battle continues as Combs' defense pushes for a new trial, while speculation grows over the possibility of presidential intervention. Backlash over potential Trump pardon for Diddy intensifies. The possibility of a presidential pardon for Sean Diddy Combs has triggered significant backlash online. Many supporters of former President Trump expressed frustration, warning that such a move could alienate key voting groups. Commentators noted that the GOP is already struggling with young female voters, a demographic likely to strongly oppose a pardon. Several accounts on social media criticized the idea. One post from an America First account stated, "Diddy is a depraved, abusive, sexual deviant who should be spending the rest of his life in prison. If Trump pardons him, he will get absolutely crushed. Who is advising him lately? It looks like straight-up sabotage at this point." Other voices shared similar sentiments, though at least one dissenting view. Commentator Milo Yiannopoulos argued on X that Trump has no choice but to pardon Diddy, claiming prosecutors lost focus on Combs' guilt once they obtained tapes allegedly implicating powerful Democrats. Milo described the prosecution as a shambles and the trial as a farce. As speculation over a pardon continues, attention has also turned to Combs' latest legal filings. His defense team has submitted a memo supporting a motion for judgment of acquittal or alternatively a new trial. The filing argues that the evidence was insufficient to sustain the conviction and reiterates several points raised during bail proceedings. The defense maintains that Combs did not profit from prostitution, that all participants were consenting adults, and that the jury rejected allegations of sex trafficking. According to the motion, the conduct was closer to voyeurism than prostitution, with payments described as compensation for time rather than for sex. Lawyers further argue that the gatherings, which were often recorded, amounted to performances protected under the First Amendment. The filing also claims Combs was prejudiced by the inclusion of evidence related to racketeering and sex trafficking, charges on which he was acquitted. This included hotel surveillance footage showing an alleged assault on Cassie Ventura, which the defense contends would not have been admissible in a case limited to prostitution charges. At minimum, the defense insists Combs should be granted a new trial. Legal analyst and criminal defense attorney Bradford Cohen, who has previously secured federal pardons for clients including Kodak Black and Lil Wayne, noted that the arguments are notable given Combs' unusual conviction under the Mann Act. Cohen emphasized that historically, the Mann Act has roots in racially motivated enforcement, originally targeting the movement of white women across state lines by men of color. Legal experts point out that the Mann Act was originally intended to prevent the commercial exploitation of women across state lines, typically involving pimping and profit from sexual activities. In Combs' case, however, no evidence suggested that he profited from the alleged conduct. Instead, defense attorneys argued the events were consensual and arranged for entertainment purposes, not commercial gain. The Mann Act is rarely applied in modern prosecutions. In fact, very few individuals have been charged under it in recent decades, and currently no other person in custody has been convicted under the statute. Defense lawyers maintain that the law's racist origins and infrequent use underscore why its application to Combs is inappropriate. While the argument is considered noteworthy, legal analysts believe the presiding judge is unlikely to overturn the conviction on that basis alone. The issue, however, could be raised more forcefully in a potential appeal. The defense also presented what it describes as a stronger argument for a new trial. Attorneys contend that if prosecutors intended to pursue only the two Mann Act counts, much of the additional evidence, including highly prejudicial material connected to racketeering and sex trafficking charges on which Combs was acquitted, would never have been introduced. According to information shared during the trial, some witnesses claimed that alleged victims, including Cassie Ventura, were more actively involved in the events than prosecutors portrayed. The defense maintains this evidence supports the need for reconsideration of the verdict and at least warrants a new trial. Defense arguments continue to highlight claims that key witnesses were more actively involved in arranging and financing activities than prosecutors suggested. According to testimony, some individuals allegedly hired others, shared photographs, and even extended invitations to gatherings when Combs himself was not present. Defense arguments argue this amounts to potential Brady material, evidence favorable to the accused, that may not have been properly disclosed. The defense maintains that Combs' conviction on Mann Act charges was influenced by prejudicial evidence introduced under other counts, including racketeering and sex trafficking, charges on which he was ultimately acquitted. They maintain that without the additional evidence, such as the hotel surveillance footage, the jury may not have returned guilty verdicts on the Mann Act counts. Observers, however, note that the jury could have relied primarily on documentary evidence, such as travel records and payment receipts, in reaching its decision. Analysts argue that while the Intercontinental Hotel video may have affected perceptions of Combs' character, the conviction could just as easily have been based on the documentation presented in court. Legal experts caution that in cases with multiple charges, juries sometimes deliver mixed verdicts. In such situations, jurors may compromise, convicting on some counts while acquitting on others. This dynamic, sometimes described as splitting the baby, raises ongoing debate over whether outside evidence improperly influenced the outcome of Combs' trial.
Questions raised over jury influence. Attention shifts to possible pardon. Legal analysts continue to debate whether Sean Diddy Combs' conviction under the Mann Act was influenced by factors beyond the documentary evidence. Some observers suggest that jurors may have felt compelled to convict on the lesser charges after viewing damaging evidence and testimony related to other allegations. The concern is that jurors might have reasoned, he is not a good person, he did transport individuals across state lines, so let's convict him on this. While no juror has publicly stated this reasoning, experts believe interviews may surface after sentencing. Jurors often choose to share their perspectives once a case concludes, and analysts predict some members of the panel may eventually reveal how evidence and closing arguments shaped their decisions. With appeals uncertain, discussion has now shifted to whether Combs could seek relief through a presidential pardon or commutation. Unlike a pardon, which wipes away a federal conviction, a commutation only reduces or eliminates the sentence while leaving the conviction intact. Both fall under the president's constitutional authority. Legal experts say Sean Combs, who was recently convicted under the Mann Act, may have a pathway to seek clemency through a pardon or commutation. The Department of Justice website provides an application process where individuals can submit reasons for relief, including community service, mitigating circumstances, and evidence of unfair prejudice during trial. According to attorneys familiar with the process, applicants can file both a pardon and commutation request in the same petition. Supporting documents such as the indictment and statements outlining why the conviction was unjust are typically included. Pro bono organizations and charities often assist with these filings, especially in cases involving older drug offenses or instances where the law may have been unfairly applied. Combs' legal situation may offer him a stronger chance than others, observers suggest, because he was acquitted of the most serious charges, including sex trafficking and racketeering. Analysts note that President Trump has previously granted clemency in cases where he believed individuals were railroaded or wrongfully convicted, regardless of public opinion. However, questions remain about optics and public perception. During the trial, evidence such as text messages, photographs, and video footage painted a troubling picture. While Combs was cleared of the most severe allegations, critics argued the trial record could make it difficult for the former president to justify a full pardon. Some experts believe a commutation, reducing the length of the sentence rather than erasing the conviction, may be a more realistic option. For example, if Combs were sentenced to 5 years, a commutation could lower that to 2 or 3 years. Commentators also note that even Combs' own attorneys have not portrayed him as an angel. Instead, the defense focused on the legal application of the Mann Act, which some critics argue is unconstitutional or was improperly applied in this case. Legal analysts emphasize that the central issue is not Combs' personal reputation, but whether the facts of the case align with fair and consistent application of the law. Legal commentators note that Sean Diddy Combs will have served roughly 15 to 16 months in custody by the time of sentencing, which could affect clemency calculations. Defense attorneys argue that substantial time already served undercuts the notion that Combs received a freebie. Under that view, a commutation to time served or a reduction to roughly 18 to 21 months would be a reasonable remedy if the sentence imposed is 4 or 5 years. Clemency proponents point out that federal commutations do not erase convictions but can shorten or eliminate a sentence, allowing an individual to be released earlier. Historical precedent shows that former President Donald Trump has granted clemency to several high-profile entertainers and public figures, sometimes after concluding the sentence or prosecution appeared unfair. Defenders of clemency emphasize that Trump's pre-presidential fame and continued ties to pop culture figures give him greater familiarity with defendants from celebrity circles than many prior presidents. Questions about possible political motivations have surfaced, including whether resentment towards the lead prosecutor, Carrie or Mann Comey, daughter of former FBI Director James Comey, may influence a pardon or commutation decision. Critics contend animus towards Comey's office may factor into any presidential review, while others caution against reducing complex prosecutorial decisions to partisan retribution. On bail and sentencing, court filings recently submitted by Combs' team restate arguments previously raised. The Mann Act charges are exceptional and were applied in unusual factual circumstances. Combs was acquitted of the most serious counts, and the relationships at issue involved consenting adults within a swinger or entertainment context. The defense argues that historically no one has been held in custody on comparable Mann Act convictions in the manner Combs has been detained. Sentencing projections vary. Some analysts who ran guideline calculations estimate a recommended sentence in the neighborhood of 21 to 22 months based on a relatively low offense level and typical criminal history scoring. Prosecutors, however, are expected to push for aggravating factors that could produce a 4 to 5 year term. Judges retain broad discretion because these Mann Act counts carry no mandatory minimums. Whether bail will be granted pending sentencing or appeal also remains uncertain. Historically, federal judges rarely release defendants on bond during the appeals process, particularly in high-profile matters. Observers say that judges' view of the likely sentence will strongly influence any decision on bail. If the judge contemplates a sentence around 20 months, bail is less likely. If the judge signals a multi-year sentence, bail pending appeal becomes somewhat more plausible, though still an uphill lift. Defense counsel maintain that additional witness statements and materials suitable for inclusion in a clemency petition could bolster arguments that Combs was unfairly charged or that the Mann Act was misapplied. They acknowledge Combs is not without troubling conduct in the record, but insist the legal questions about charge selection and evidence admissibility warrant relief of some kind. Bradford Cohen, a criminal defense attorney with experience obtaining federal clemency for entertainers, told the program that a commutation to time served would, at minimum, be a defensible outcome if the court imposes a multi-year term. Cohen reiterated that a full pardon would erase the conviction, while a commutation would only shorten or eliminate the sentence. The courtroom phase of the case has concluded. The next critical events are sentencing and the defense's pending motions. The availability of bail, the sentence imposed on October 3rd, and any subsequent clemency petition to the White House will determine whether presidential intervention becomes a consequential factor in Combs' legal fate.